Hi. So today we're going to be talking about fractured leaders, and when we are fractured as a leader, we tend to give false direction. Okay, so uh, one of my mentors is going through, a season of change, shifting, and things in his personal life, um, and the spiritual intuitive person inside me can feel all of that energy that's happening. Um, and I think most of you in this group are intuitive. You guys have an inner knowing and an inner sense of being and discerning things, and so this is why I'm talking about it to you here in this group. Um, and when I'm not one to gossip, but I feel like this story is very appropriate for this time. And especially in this time of COVID, there's a lot that's happening in, because I know most of you are probably in memberships, you guys are in other Facebook groups with leaders. And I don't know if you've been feeling this as well, but there are leaders who are still leading from a place of leadership and not on a pedestal, but still like from a high or from a positive place. And there are other leaders who are struggling financially, who are leading from a place of um, what is that called? This is not in my notes. Kind of ad-libbing here. Not discouragement, but from a needy, like a desperate. I was like, what's the word? From a desperate point of view, and so I just wanted to put that out there. And for me, I've actually been in a very restorative season. So the subtitle for this is comes from Psalms 23, restoration of the soul. Um, Most of you probably know Psalm 23, even if you not grown up in the church or not in church, whatever. But Psalms 23 is the Lord is my shepherd, right? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He leadeth me. Like I learned it in the King James Version, right? So he leadeth me to lie down in green pastures and beside the still waters. And this morning when I was journaling about that, what God really spoke to me was about these leaders who are fractured in their souls. And, I'm raising my hand. This time of COVID I've been experiencing a lot of stuff in the spiritual realm. Things have been coming to me. I've been having to process it. I've also had to adjust how I show up, who I work with, what types of people I allow into my, my little bubble, because right now, energy, especially if you're a high empath, a lot of stuff that's happening now can affect your energy. So give me a one or say yes if this is you. If you are a high empath, I just want to know where you guys are and if this is only me, because I'm feeling like it's not. So, um, and so, going back to the title, fractured leaders give false direction. So when we are wounded in the soul, when we are hurt and we are affected by trauma, we base our, especially as leaders, when we are leading from a place of distress, and I've seen it in the refinery, there's a lot of stressful things that happen inside of a refinery. We call them, right, emergency situations. So things happen. Let's see if I can give you guys a real world example. So you're on the freeway, you're driving, and then all of a sudden, like your car starts breaking down and you're in the middle lane of a 5-lane highway, and all of a sudden your engine shuts off. What are you feeling right now? Even thinking about that, right? It's like, whoa, fight or flight, all of your adrenaline's pumping. You're like, oh my God, like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? There's all, like, say you're in a group with like 4 people. There is going to be a leader that emerges in that car, right? If they're sitting with you in the car and the car breaks down, there's going to be one person who is a leader and it's going to be like, hey, let's because some people are going to be in shock, right? And there's some people who are going to just spring into leadership and direction and guidance. And these are the people who you can tell are natural born leaders. And like the person who's like, you go over there, you go that, right? The people who like come alive in these types of situations, you can tell that they are natural born leaders. So look around you in this time. One, are you a natural born leader? Are you, when like crisis hits, are you that person that is saying, hey, maybe we should do this. Maybe I should do this. Like the people who are coming out and saying like, hey, you should pivot, like there's, oh my gosh, if I hear the word pivot one more time from another coach or another, person I follow online who's a business coach. I have a lot of coaches, but there's people that I just follow, email newsletters and stuff. I'm just like, but the people who are doing and pivoting, who are doing it and not responding versus reacting, right? And that's what I mean, like fractured leaders, like people who have issues with their soul, right? So this goes back to the Psalm 23, he restoreth my soul. And when our souls are restored, when we are happy, healthy, and whole as people, this is where, we become the natural leader. We are that person that people go to, look to when crisis is happening around us. So just, I mean, this is no condemnation, but just take a look at yourself and just, where are you? Are you reactive or are you responsive? So this is not in my notes either, but reactive. Like if something hits, like, are you just quick to react? Like knee-jerk reaction. I wrote in my notes, shoot from the hip, right? If you're making a decision to avoid pain, or are you right, reactive versus responsive? Are you trained? Are you like, so we used to train in the refinery to respond to emergencies. So there are certain things that happen that you don't know are going to happen. Just take the freeway example, right? You don't know your engine is going to shut down, right? Hi, Shani. We don't know if our engine is going to shut down in the middle of the freeway. I mean, hey, we might have had a check engine light or a low gas, like we should have filled gas before we left the house. Sometimes we just keep pressing on and like we ignore the signs. So that's a whole different issue. But right, when you're in the, like, say that's the first time that has ever happened to you, right? It's okay to react because you don't know. But when we were in the refinery, we had this whole place where we would list incidents. So incidents are things that happen, right? We have alarms. We have all kinds of documentation to tell us when incidents happen. There's so much data. So if you're in marketing, right, data points would be for you how many emails were opened, how many people signed up for a Facebook group, since we're in a Facebook group, right? How many people, That's all, it's all numbers, it's all data. In the refinery, we track data, like we just tracked a lot of data because when incidents would happen, it would allow us to go back in the history and get the data that would lead us to like, okay, why did this happen? And when we are able to dissect all of that, it allows us to respond better the next time versus be reactive mode. And leaders who are fractured, right? Leaders who are fractured and they have like gaping soul wounds. They're always going to be reactive in that one area. So let's say, hi, Sean. Okay, so I'm going to introduce this. Like I said on Saturday, I was going to introduce my time wheel. So, right, if you have wounds in any of these areas, right? If you have, the time quadrant talks about relationships. So if you have a soul wound around relationships and how people have mistreated you in the past, you're probably gonna have a hole in like a leak, like a hole that like just sucks. There's gonna be a hole in your time bucket. Yeah, that's what I meant to say. Right. So if you find that you don't have a lot of time, you probably have a soul wound in this area where you were not loved and accepted when you were younger in a certain situation. So you're always trying to fill this relationship gap, and therefore your time is there's a hole in your time bucket. Conversely, on the opposite side of the wheel is the money wheel, the money quadrant of the wheel. Sorry. So if you have like soul wounds around money or issues with money, you probably have holes in your bank account, or like you might have emotional spending tendencies, stuff like that. So, and then this is the other axis, right? Intention and energy. We'll talk about that next time. But yeah, basically, if you have holes in your bucket, which I reference as a fractured soul, then you're leading from you're not leading from a place of empowerment, more disempowerment. And then when you're leading from this place in your life, you're going to give people false direction because you're going to be leading from a place of woundedness, and you're going to be leading out of a place of hurt. And this is not a good way to lead. So, yeah. Does anyone have any questions? I think, yeah, that's all the notes that I have. Hold on, real quick. Yep. Anyway, does this make sense to you? If it does, let me know. If it's kind of off, let me know. I have a lot of information that I want to share, and it's really coming from a place of 15 years leadership and corporate training in the refinery, and also seeing how leaders lead, and not trying to toot my own horn or anything, but I discovered that I am a natural born leader. I was like, is when we were in like tight situations, I would automatically jump to, okay, what are we gonna do? Or let's do something, let's do something about this, instead of being in that kind of, it's different from reactive and responsive. I'm like, let's respond to the situation. Like when I was new, I was like ready to go, looking for someone to tell me where am I gonna run to? Literally run. Like we don't run sometimes if we're not quick, or if we're not swift on it, things could not necessarily explode. There's like other safety mechanisms in place before the place would actually explode. But if we trigger one of these emergency trips or mechanisms, then there are just major consequences. Nobody would die. Like that would be like the worst thing that could happen. But we could have catastrophic failures. So equipment damage could happen, just stuff like that. So in those times where it's like, woo, like alarms are going off. Yes, thank you, Sean. Alarms are going off. It's to trigger us, to let us know that, hey, something's happening, and we had different levels of alarms. Emergency alarms, right, are different types of like how quickly do we have to respond, and even how they set up the alarms and how they categorize the alarms. There's a whole science behind alarms, like the criticality. And here's the criticality chart actually. So what is the likelihood? Can you guys see that? Likelihood versus the severity, right? So if it's majorly severe, then and is a high likelihood, then it would be a high level alarm. If it was low on the severity scale and low on the likelihood of it actually happening or actually, then we would have like a low priority alarm. And so yeah, there's a lot I could talk about on alarms, but that's the whole thing with reactive versus responsive. We would actually train on how to respond to high and emergency alarms. Like that would just be part of our training process. And even as I was training people who are coming up, right, as I became the trainers, I became a leader, it was my responsibility to make sure that my guy, and they're all men, so like make sure my guy, like my trainee, would be able to track with me. And when I say these words, when I say go do this, he knows what I'm talking about, right? Because we use different words and verbiage, specific equipment and what to do, buttons, valves, lineups. So I would have to make sure he knew emergency procedures like the back of his hand, and he could respond versus react. Because the first thing you do when you don't know what's happening and you hear these alarms going off, it's like, right, the fight, flight, or freeze response. And so I had to make sure that my guys were trained to respond to an alarm and not freeze. Because every second that the person would freeze would mean like less seconds before stuff would, potentially blow up. So anyway, that's what I have today. So if you are, to recap, right, fractured leaders give false direction. If you don't know what's happening, if you are more reactive versus responsive, if you have not built up your responsiveness, you're always going to be in reactive mode. And that's how you can determine, especially in this time of COVID, what kind of leaders you're following. Are they reactive or are they responsive? And I'm telling on myself. I've just been in a cocoon, and I've been really trying to listen to. I've actually pulled away from my leaders. Well, the one leader I was talking about in the beginning, but I've pulled away from some leaders because they were not leading from the right space. Going through their own personal stuff. The stuff that was coming out of them was more reactive versus responsive and not leading me in the right direction. So I had to just shut everything down, pull back, and just, allow myself to process the messages that were coming in. So it's kind of like alarms. When there's an event, an emergency event, there's so many alarms that just go off. Sometimes 20 to 30, 10 to 20 alarms all at once come in. That's what we call an alarm flood. And when so many things are coming at you, and so think about the news, right? The news, there's this happening, there's that happening, that social media, oh, this is happening, watch out, the economy, blah, blah, blah. Wear your mask, don't wear your mask. All of those things. They're, especially for us who are high empath, sometimes we have to just make sure who we're following, what kind of leadership are we under, and, really discern where their source is. And if their source is muddy, if their source is more reactive, because I've had bosses in corporate, um, when stuff hit the fan, so there's this one guy, I mean, he's super knowledgeable, but when stuff would hit the fan, his voice would just go up an octave. And you could, we use walkie-talkies, right? So you could barely hear him over the radio. Oh, sorry. We used to make fun of him, sometimes. That's not the right response. But, the guys used to make fun of him, like, yeah, every time that there's an emergency, he does this. And we used to evaluate leaders all the time. And like, why did they tell us to do this? Why is he leading us in this way? And we were judged by how we led in the refinery and how we were able to stay cool and calm under pressure. So, and those are the things that I want to teach you guys, how to be resilient leaders, especially in this new economy. And yeah. So weird. That's half of what's in my notes. That's, I don't know, sometimes you just gotta let God lead. And I feel like leaders should be transparent, not overly transparent where everyone's dirty laundry, but in my transparency, I get so distracted by comments, guys. I just do. And so I'm learning how to be better at that. And because when I watch videos, I want to be acknowledged. Just if I have a question, I don't want it to be ignored. So maybe I have a hole in my relationship bucket because I want to feel acknowledged. I want to feel accepted. But I'm like, why am I watching if you're not reading my comments and not responding to me? Because if I'm watching, I would like, I would like for you to answer my question because I obviously have a question. So getting better at that and looking at your guys' comments. So with that, if you guys have any questions about anything I talked about today, and again, in transparency, what's hard for me is because I've lived in the refinery. I lived that refinery life for so long. Sometimes when I start talking about refinery examples, I don't know exactly how to dumb it down. I hate that word, but simplify it so that you guys understand. And I'm not speaking refineries, So let me know if I get too technical talking about refinery stuff when I'm giving you guys examples. Okay. So next week, I'm going to go over this intention and energy piece of the wheel and the holes in the buckets that we have. And that could be affecting us as leaders. Alrighty. I'll see you guys next week. Bye.